So we're going to go through very briefly, give you an overview of how forms work, and then we'll talk a little bit about different form tags. And then the next video will actually get into doing some hands-on. So for an overview of forms, I'm sure most of you have used forms because they are widely used on the internet. And basically you fill in a form and you submit it. Now what happens after you submit the form is it goes to some type of scripting language. Typically, client-side scripts are used to validate the form. They just make sure that everything that you have entered is accurate. And client-side scripts basically work on your machine. They're part of the page and they're downloaded to your machine, and they do the work on your machine just to make sure that everything you've entered is accurate. Server-side scripts work on the server, and they are typically used if you need to update information that is on a database. Okay, so the client-side scripts are mainly used for validation, although they can do calculations and other things. Server-side scripts will also do the validation, but their purpose is typically to update a database or something similar. JavaScript is probably the most popular client-side language. Popular server-side languages would be PHP and ASP.NET. And there are a wide variety of languages, many more languages than the ones that I just mentioned, but the ones I mentioned are the most popular. In order to use a script, you need to know the input the script expects. So when you submit the script is a program that's going to run, and it's expecting particular names and naming conventions. And so you need to know what that is and use those names in your form. And we'll talk about the name and the ID attribute because those are the two key pieces that these scripts look at. Okay, so you need to know what the script expects, and you need to put those naming conventions into your form. And let's see. In this class, I did create a very simple script for you guys to submit to. All it does is display the data back to you, but it does kind of get you used to submitting. Okay, and submitting to a script is very common and something that you will do if you get into web page creation out in industry. Form elements are basically the different types of values or boxes that you're going to see in a form. So I've kind of listed some of the more common ones. The input box or the text box, option or radio buttons. When you use those, only one of them can be turned on. We have a selection list, also called a drop-down list, also a data list. Basically, you click the arrow and you see your choices. We can also have something called an open list box, which is another type of selection list. We can create check boxes, which you can turn on and off, and multiple boxes can be turned on or off. We have text areas, which are typically used for comments or free-form text. And then we have submission and reset buttons. And you're going to be learning how to create all of these. Some terminology you should be familiar with is that the element that you create in a form is called a field, and the actual data that you key in is called a field value. The very first thing that you need to create when you are starting a form is you need to put in the form tag. So basically the form tag indicates what the name of the form is, because you can have more than one. So you always want to give it a name. And it also indicates the name of the script that you are going to submit to and how the data is going to be submitted. Okay, so here's the syntax. You use form, you have ID, and you have name. Okay, and typically the text that you use is the same for both. Older web browsers tend to use name. A newer convention is ID. And I will tell you that depending on the scripting language that you are submitting to, JavaScript tends to use ID, but PHP tends to use name. Okay, so the different scripting languages are going to pull data from different places. So that is why you need both. And you want to make sure that the names match or are the same. Then we have the submission method, which is post or get. If you use post, a file is sent to the script. Okay, and it's kind of like a secret file that you can't see. If you use get, up on your address bar, you will see all of the name value pairs. So you will see the name or ID, and you'll also see the value that was keyed in. It's visible on the address bar for all to see. My best example of this is when you do a web search. If you look in that address bar, you see all the data up there. That is what a get looks like. And then you have the action, which is typically the web address of the script that you're going to use. Okay, so that's your opening form. Then you've got all of the form element tags, and then you have a closing form. And let's see, mail to. I'm sure you've probably heard of mail to forms. And basically, instead of submitting to a script, you are submitting to an email address. So if you have an action of mail to : followed by an email address, you've created a mail to form. With this type of form, you're going to have method equal post, and then you're going to have NC type text plain so that it's readable. And here's an example of how that might look. Now, when you are creating a form, the form can get rather lengthy, and it is helpful to group logical areas of the form together. So you put all the address information together. You put all of the payment information together. And the element or tag that does that is called field set. So you will have an opening field set and a closing field set, and then you'll have similar information inside. Legend is used to display text above the group. Okay, so field set creates the group, legend displays the text for the group. Another useful tag for identifying fields is a label. And if you're going to use label, this format works fairly well because you are connecting the label to the ID within your input tag. So here I have input type as text, so it's going to be a text box. I'm giving it an ID equal to name, and you'll notice that the label says for equal name. So this is connecting this label, which is right here, to this input element. Okay, same with the next one. We've got for equal email. Over here in our input tag, we have ID equal email, and that is what connects them. And that brings me to input tags. Input tags are probably the most common type of form element, and that is because there are so many different types of input tags. And when you create an input tag, the first thing you typically tell it is the type of input tag you are creating. After you give it the type, there's a whole laundry list of attributes you can use, which we will be covering in a minute. But for the types, you can see that we can create a button or a checkbox or a file, or we can have a hidden field. We can have an image, we can have a password, a radio, a reset button, a submit button. We can have a text field, text area field, and then we get into all of the new HTML5 fields. You can actually select color. You can pick dates. You can enter email. And all of these new HTML5 types have some built-in validation. So they are trying to ensure if you say date, that you're actually entering a date. Some of the browsers handle this better than others. Okay? And you will notice a difference in the forms you create, because we're going to use some of these newer HTML5 types. After you give it the type, then you have to give it your laundry list of attributes. And these are all of the attributes. So we've already talked about name and ID. Okay? That associates text with your input element, and the name and the ID should be the same. Then we have value. You are either going to have a value or a placeholder, but you are not going to have both. Value sets a default value. Placeholder displays a prompt regarding what they need to enter. So they're very different. A value, if they didn't enter something and you specified value, that would end up being a default value. Whereas a placeholder displays text, but it's not a default. Okay, it's a prompt. So totally different purpose with the two of them. Then we have size, and size specifies the length of where you're going to enter the field value, but it doesn't limit the length of the data. So it's basically the length of the entry box. If you want to modify or specify the length of the data, then you have to use max length. Another attribute that we are going to be using is required. If you put required in the element, they have to enter data into it. Okay, so this is just another validation technique that you can use to help ensure that the data is accurate. We have autocomplete, and if you have that in the element, you're allowing autocomplete to do its thing. And I love autocomplete, so I would tend to add that to my elements because it tries to fill things in. And obviously, if you didn't want to use what it suggested, you can just keep typing. But more times than not, when I'm filling in a form, autocomplete works great. Autofocus is typically used on one field, and when the form first loads, it is the field that you want them to start entering data into. List is only used with a data list. In the input tag, list specifies a name for the data list. The data list itself, which we will talk about in a little while, has to use the same name as what you've given list in your input element. Multiple indicates for a selection list that you can pick more than one. And we already talked about placeholder. Max and min basically set a minimum and a maximum value for a numeric field. And step is also used in a numeric field and specifies how much you can increment by. Typically, it is used for spin arrows, okay, where you click the arrow and the number goes up. you can specify how much the number increases or decreases by. So in a nutshell, that was kind of an overview of all of the elements. And what I think I'll do next is just get into the hands-on, and as we are entering these different types of fields, we'll talk more about them.